Poorly written or executed procurement documents, RFPs, RFIs, RFQs, you name it, end up creating unnecessary costs for their authors. The company VisibleThread just studied 5 of the biggest RFPs issued by government last year, a combined value of more than $7 billion. Fergal McGovern is CEO of VisibleThread. Fergal, you chose these from the General Services Administration, from the Air Force, Navy, and others. Why did you choose to look at the ones that you did?
We really wanted to make sure that there was an objective assessment of the clarity and the quality of the actual written content. So we were not fussy about which ones we were looking at. We generally looked at high-value procurements, and we wanted to take a random sampling.
What was the most significant thing that you found about how these were written and how the agencies responded to the way they were written?
It's a great question, Francis. So basically what we found is that the content was actually leading to a lot of difficulty in interpreting the instructions. So we look specifically at certain parts of the contracts which actually drive the requirements. Things like Section M, which are a very important part of the contract, the statement of work, which the contractors are looking at from the point of view of what they need to deliver on. What we found is that the complexity inherent in the content was driving misinterpretation and likely would lead to extended cycles during the procurement cycle and cost overruns.
So the complexity was in the way that the agencies were writing about the information that they wanted the vendors to submit. What about the way that the vendors were then submitting that information to the agencies?
Well, it's very interesting. As a vendor of software, our solutions are actually analyzing both sides of the fence. So the vendors on the other side are also running their content through this machine as well. So effectively, it gives you an objective set of metrics that give you a complexity measure. And that's really the key point for us.
What would you like to see agencies do in order to make this process easier? Because really this winds up costing the agencies money because the vendors wind up having to write these costs into their overhead. So whether they're selling on this contract or another one, it drives up overhead costs broadly across the companies.
So it's very interesting. In 2010, President Obama passed the Clear Writing Act, and the intent of that was to make communication to the general citizenry much clearer so that people could respond in a better way and engage with government in a better way. Unfortunately, that's got not so much teeth, and what's happening right now is that people are still writing in different styles and different ways. The best way to treat this is to treat words and language in the same way as you would treat code in an IT setting. Test the content, test the language, and if you can do that and you can run the rule over the content, you get a much cleaner outcome and a much easier to interpret outcome.
How do you test that? Is there a tool, or are there ways to go about doing that within an office?
There are very well-known measures for doing this. This very simple measure is testing the proportion of long sentences in a document. We've all been to various levels of education, and you'll remember well the academic themes and tones that you got from academics. They tend to be way too complex. They're driven by passive voice, which is, and you'll hear it in political speeches. Mistakes were made. Who made the mistake, when was it made, and who's attributed to that mistake? If you write a contract with language like mistakes were made, there's a misinterpretation. What do I actually need to deliver on? So you can measure passive voice, you can measure long sentences. You can also use more academically defined criteria like readability. The Flesch Reading Ease Index is a well-known measure, and it measures complexity, and it was developed by the US Army back in the 70s. With the sense of trying to make sure that instruction manuals were clear and could be understood by a normally educated person.
What I don't hear you saying is that this is a particularly complex thing. It's an extra step, yes, but it sounds like it's easy to demonstrate a return on investment, that if I take this extra step, it bears benefits on the back end, because number one, for a vendor, I'll probably win more business.
The vendor benefits, the government benefits. It's a really simple thing to just press a couple of buttons and get a readability assessment at scale, and this is the key. So there are many solutions out there that will do very specific, document one by one specific things. Nobody has time to do that, but if you can put 100 documents through a measurement like this and focus on the least quality documents and fix those, downstream you'll see profound benefit.
It also sounds like that kind of a solution would be beneficial and easy to execute in the context of going back and looking at what we've done in the past year as an agency or as a vendor, to be able to say, here are the ways that we need to improve.
Exactly, and actually many of our customers are doing exactly that. They look at their past performance and they're trying to flag whether there's risk in the past performance, i.e. open-ended statements that are hard to contractually deliver against, and they'll choose to omit those from their future submissions. Equally, they choose the best stuff, and they'll get that boilerplate and actually submit it to the government, which will perform better in the overall criteria and scoring position. On the agency side, a lot of the content issued is boilerplate content. So the starting point is very simple. Let's harmonize the boilerplate content, let's simplify it, so that effectively the cycles speed up.
The other thing I don't hear is I don't hear any cry for a policy prescription or anything like that.
No.
It sounds like agencies have the tools to be able to make these work a lot better for themselves and for the vendors already.
You know, the funny thing about this, and it's quite incredible, the area of language and words is the single last frontier for this whole area of automation. We automate everything in life, but we are not automating the assessment of quality around language. And that is a crazy situation. So in effect, people are doing manual jobs and spending lots of hours doing very simple checklists by hand. So if you get a procurement in and you're a government agency and you get multiple procurements side by side, people are going through and scoring those by hand. If you start to run the rule against those and check them for clarity, or check them for matching the requirements, then you can start to get much faster and speedier turnaround times and cycles, and that's in everybody's interest.
Fergal McGovern, thank you very much for coming on the program.
My pleasure. Thanks.